international context. So there's a lot to cover. Coursework will provide students with tools to identify historic and contemporary tensions around race and difference, map economic and racial disparities over time, strengthen their own identity development, and address bias in their communities. So that was the overview that was given to us by the state education. And then our next slide will be the outline of our course, and I'll turn it over to Erin.
Hi, everyone. This is the course outline that CERC provided for us, and it is broken into 2 semesters. So you'll notice the first semester is a focus on African American history, and you'll see that it takes a chronological approach through the semester, starting with African origins and then going to the present. The second semester is a focus on Puerto Rican and Latino history, and that does not take a chronological approach. It takes a thematic approach, so it's a little bit different for the second semester. So this is CERC's outline, and then I'm just going to go into depth on the next slide, just on the historical topics that we've covered so far this semester. So one thing I do want to say is this really is an American history class, but we have the opportunity to focus in on African American and Latino American history. So the first semester, we traced African American history chronologically, and we've examined African American experiences as well as African American contributions to the growth and development of the country. And then along the way, students have been able to make connections back to their US history classes from 8th and 10th grade. And students are also making connections to current issues as well. These are the topics. There's going to be 2 slides of topics. We go back to, but I'm going to pop through them real quick. We go back to African history is obviously an enormous, rich, diverse history. So we just do a snapshot of African history before the Atlantic slave trade. And then we jump into the Atlantic slave trade, focusing a little bit on New England. One of the things that CERC wants us to do is tie in local history. So we looked at Rhode Island in particular with this topic. We explored the American slave system as well as and how that was entwined with the American economy. We then explored agency, resistance, and abolition with a focus on Black abolitionists. We explored the Civil War, Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, and the establishment of the Jim Crow laws. And then we moved on into the Great Migration. I don't know if you remember your American history, but this is between 1910 and 1970. Prior to the Great Migration, the majority of African Americans, 90% of African Americans lived in the South, and that's going to change with this Great Migration. Then we move on to World War I, and followed by the Harlem Renaissance, which is a flourishing cultural movement. And we also did a focus on the Tulsa Race Massacre. You might recognize this from the news. Last May was the 100th year anniversary of the movement, of that massacre, excuse me. And so the students were really interested in learning more about that. We moved into the Great Depression and the New Deal, and then segued right into World War II, where Black Americans were fighting for what's known as the double V, victory against fascism abroad and victory for democracy at home, which led to the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s. And then in the 1960s, the Black Power movement splintered off of the civil rights movement. And that's where we are right now, moving into contemporary movements. The weather hasn't really helped us at the end here, but we've made a lot of progress this semester. We've kept pace with what CERC has wanted us to keep pace with. And the kids have been really engaged and interested.
The next slide just details a little bit of the types of assignments and the way we've structured the interaction with all the materials. So we've given the kids a number of quizzes. Some of them are recall, but a lot of them are really synthesis based and really getting them to pull different aspects of history together and see how things are interplaying and answering those questions for them, or asking them to ask those questions of like, why do these two things fit together and what are the implications of one on the other? We have them doing projects and presentations where there's an opportunity for a lot of student choice. CIRC was really adamant that this should be a student-driven course. And so as much as we can, when we have the opportunity, we allow the kids to explore deeply an aspect of the topic that we're covering, and they get to choose what aspect of that topic they'd like to cover. There have been research assignments and presentations, both group and individual. And then one of the other aspects of the CIRC curriculum is that students provided the opportunity to share what they've learned with their classmates. So for their midterm, they've all chosen an individual or a topic that celebrates Black American culture. And we're going to be working with the library to create a Black American cultural fair where they're going to be presenting their topics to their peers. And they'll have a space, kind of like a science fair situation where people can come around and like learn about different African Americans and their contribution to American culture. And so that fulfills like that aspect of the CIRC curriculum. The other thing is we have the opportunity to teach the course as a studies course, so combining history and literature and other artistic aspects as well. So throughout, like whenever there's an opportunity to really highlight the contribution to the arts in every fashion, we've been doing that as well. And then the kids also with their choice are able to make some of those decisions in terms of what they study. But one thing we've used, and this has like been a framework, is this. We've been using the book Homegoing. And so Homegoing, really, the book itself follows the lineage of two half-sisters born in different villages in Ghana. And it follows their descendants through 8 generations. So one line stays in Africa, and we get to see the how Africa really post the European involvement in Africa, like what did that look like, and how did those generations handle that situation and respond to the like both the presence of the Europeans and the absence of them. And then in the other line, the family line, is captured and brought enslaved on the Atlantic slave trade, and they come to America, and it plays out 8 generations in America through modern day. And so it's really an excellent book to follow exactly the arc of the class. And it's given the kids an opportunity to see in a historical fictional novel how all of the things that we're talking about in the history are playing out for potentially, not real people, but like fictional people, and just getting to see the implications of all the different historical moments that we've been learning about in class. So it's been a real great companion to all of the topics that we've covered. And that is where we are today. So we'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
I have one. So, Mr. Mail, yes, I know Victoria's in your class, but trust me, I don't ask her how you're doing, or if you do, I know you're doing a great job. It is interesting because I certainly didn't get exposure to this depth of content when I had my history classes many years ago. So I know she comes home with her assignments and is happy to share what she's learned, which is great. Because I'm learning quite a bit too, which is nice to see. Hey, I was curious. You said you're covering some historical figures. I believe you said with Rhode Island or from Rhode Island. Did I hear that correctly?
When we talked about the trade, yeah, that's okay. When we talked about the transatlantic slave trade, I talked about Rhode Island played a really large role in that slave trade. I didn't explore any specific individuals, just the economy of Rhode Island and what role they played in the movement, in the movement of.
Okay,
yeah.
I was curious at a CADE if we're going to cover or plan on covering any local historical figures, from the Black Latino community over this course. We were at a CADE conference actually back in November, and some of the other pilot districts are trying to also focus on notable figures in the local communities or surrounding areas. Like I wasn't sure if, and again, just curiosity, if you guys are planning to talk about, Edward Boucher, I think was the first Black person to get a PhD in Connecticut and some other. So I'm not sure if you guys plan on coming around to those cultures and looking at historical figures locally in Connecticut for the contribution.
Yeah, that is actually something that we would really like to cover in the future. We had to certainly make decisions about what to include, because there's the wealth of information that CERC gave us to cover was really broad, and certainly there are like notable figures that we can cover, and there's lots of great connections because one of my friends is an artist in New Haven who just did a mural of Boucher on the side of one of the buildings in New Haven, and I also work at Hopkins in the summer, and he graduated from Hopkins and then went to Yale, and so there is a like really strong rich history, and there's like individuals in our community that also, and like in Cheshire itself, that we can take a look at. I think it's going to be a matter as we go forward throughout the years, looking at what the kids' interests are, how we can move through the material and give them the background, the historical background that they need, and then who we can connect with at different times to bring in more local figures. But absolutely, that's a big part of the curriculum, is to keep it local.
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious. Thank you so much.
Anne?
Yeah. So I agree with you, Don and Aaron. I looked at those materials that came from CERC, and it's massive. I mean, there's so much there, and I can't tell you, and I want to say publicly how pleased I was when I heard that the two powerhouse women of Cheshire High, Erin Griffiths and Dawn DeMeo, were going to be designing and teaching this course for the first time. So thank you for doing that. I had every faith when I heard it was you two doing it, that this was going to come out to be a really beneficial course for our high school students. And even this brief, outline of what you're doing shows me that there is a lot of thought that went into it, and I know that you had to sift through a lot of material to parse out something for a course that was cohesive and that you could do. And it's a year-long course with half and half, correct?
Yes.
So is it just, so my question, because I do have a question, is so is it worth how much credits does the student get, each student get for taking the whole year? And can they take half a course if it doesn't fit into their schedule? How does that work logistically for the student?
I think Maureen, I don't know if you want to answer. Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Right now, students get a full credit. Oh, sorry, Maureen, were you speaking, or? They get a full credit for the full year, and you can't take it as a half-year course right now. It is a full year course for the state.
And I think it's really important that it is a full year, because it's so much of it is intertwined. I mean, the intersectionality that they referred to, if you don't understand the African history part, the African American history part, it's going to be really difficult to understand the implications of all of the Latin American community is so intertwined with the African and Black experience that it's really foundational, actually. And I think that's probably why they decided to do one semester and then another. I think that like it would be a loss if the students only took one versus the other.
My other question is, do the two histories align along the way, or did the Latino history kind of come as a later experience in our history, or can we go all the way back to when African slaves were coming over with the Latino Puerto Rican history?
So when we talked about the Atlantic slave trade, one of the things I talked about was that that the vast majority of enslaved people were brought to Central and South America. So we've already talked about that, but we are going to go back to that at the start of the semester, sort of remind everybody of that, and then really focus on. So we are going back in time, and we're going to just be then focusing on Central and South America. It's not a totally chronological semester, as I mentioned before, but there is some sense of chronology. So that is something we'll be doing in the beginning of the semester.
Great.
I think in terms of design, Anne, CERC really debated in our meetings with them this summer. They had their own big debates about how to structure the course and how to design it. And there was a camp that really thought it should be intersectional the entire time. Like, how can you be talking about the Atlantic slave trade, as Aaron mentioned, and not be talking about the rest of the world and then follow that forward? They made the decision that it would be one and then the other. And they were very clear with us that they don't want us picking and choosing and putting it together in a way that is different than what they've written. They want everyone to have that same experience throughout the state. So it's good in a way because, as Aaron said, we've laid the groundwork for it. So now we don't need to explain the Atlantic slave trade. They all know already that there were enslaved Africans that were brought to these different countries. Now we can talk about what those identities are and talk about the influence of like the presence of those people in those communities as well. So it really wasn't our decision in that case.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I look forward to hearing the results at the end of the year. I would really like to hear how you think it all went and what you think the students got out of it.
And we hope you'll have the opportunity to hear that from the kids as well.
I'd love to see
I think.
some final project presentations or something. Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you. And thank you for the compliment. We appreciate it.
You deserve it.
I agree.
Faith, we can't hear you.
Again,
Talking. Sorry.
This is.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you for telling
It's
me.
working now.
There we are. There we are. Okay, so this was the course provided by CERC, and I do remember reviewing it, and it was overwhelming, even just to look at it. So the fact you are to be commended for being able to sift through all of that and put together a course. I am interested as to why CERC assumed a chronological approach to African American history and a thematic approach to Latino history. And then I'm sure it has to do with the intersectionality, but I guess I look at, especially the history around Texas, and, as the former slaves moved to Texas and then had interactions with those in Mexico, I always understood there was a tension between the two communities, especially also that so much of the slave trade was also focused on Central and Latin America. So do you discuss that tension at all, or does the chronological versus the thematic just kind of avoid that topic?
So to address the question about why one semester is chronological, one's thematic, I personally I'm not 100% certain why they did that, because I wasn't part of that discussion. I think it's the magnitude of Latin American and Latino American history, and the complexity is like what you mentioned about Latino Americans are coming from so many different Latin American countries. And so it's very, very complex. And I think that is why it's thematic. I'm not sure if what I'm saying is making sense. Dawn, can you help me on that?
No, it does make sense.
No, yeah.
So I'm assuming that's the approach. And we, as you said, the material, it's vast, and we have been parsing through it, and we will continue to do tweaks as we go forward. We do want to try to paint the full picture of the Latino American experience. So our plan is to look at different Latino Americans from different countries and explore their different experiences here.
I think. Sorry. The other piece, and just to make the second half of the year also another thread that's very interesting is the inclusion of indigenous population. So that's been some, with that's been addressed in the American history aspect and the first semester of the class just touched upon, but especially with the Latin American communities, there's much more depth in that, which just adds another layer of richness to like all of the cultures that we're going to be dealing with. So I think that they pulled that all out and just like had us get a sense of like the world and what was happening in it. And now we're going to go back and we're going to deepen that with an understanding of this is happening in America. So like what's happening simultaneously in these other countries, and then how are those going to interplay? But I think it was maybe a matter, I'm not speaking for CERC. I don't know why they made that decision either, but that works to our advantage as we go forward, having laid that foundation. It's like, okay, that we've covered a lot of territory, but now let's look at like how that's all going to work together. And they'll understand why America responds the way it does to different countries or different situations, and vice versa, why there's any involvement at different times between these different cultures.
I would like to hear from Anne and Tony on this. When you come May, June, you guys are going to have had the experience of teaching this course in our community to our kids. And I think one of my concerns is that you get autonomy to adapt this course to our school. It seems kind of heavy-handed on CERC's part. I get it the first year, but do you foresee any latitude going forward where you're going to be able to say, hey, for example, Tony raised Rhode Island, and I'm with him. I don't understand Rhode Island when we had such an incredible experience, and I don't mean that in the positive sense, but such a profound experience here in Connecticut. And we all know the Amistad, but even our late to the game franchise to Black citizens. I mean, that needs to be explored. So I guess, are you getting a sense that you're kind of chafing and you want your own autonomy, or are we going to stay under CERC's authority forever with this course?
I think that like, at least in the beginning, they've offered us a really grand amount of resources. So that's been wonderful, while they have provided a lot and asked us to accomplish a lot. But Erin and I are able like to look at like, all right, what are they already learning in US history here in our high school? What is already being covered? And then where can we go into more depth? Like where can we like then elaborate, because we can present a like synopsis of remind them of what they already knew. And to our advantage, because we have juniors and seniors in a class with freshmen and sophomores as well, we can turn to the juniors and seniors and say, quickly, what do you remember about this topic? Share what you know. What are the big highlights and takeaways? And then we can elaborate and like choose what we want to focus on. So there is a bit of autonomy. I think they wanted to make sure that in order to support us going through it the first year, that we didn't go like way off. I mean, we also have a lot of schools throughout the state that have been teaching courses in these areas before. And I think they just wanted to streamline it and make sure we were all kind of contributing to the same areas. But we're really able to say, all right, our kids know this, or our kids, or ask the kids, like, do you know this? And if they say no, all right, good, we'll make sure we cover that. And we did do local history. We did bring in someone to talk about the experience of slavery in Cheshire specifically. This person had done a presentation for us last year. And so they talked a lot about specifically like historically how that showed up on the coast, on the shoreline of Connecticut. We did talk about Amistad as well. We had to streamline this for you, because if we told you everything we talked about, you'd be like falling asleep, or you wouldn't actually, because Erin is an amazing history teacher, and I have learned so much. And so we just streamlined the presentation for you, but we did cover a lot of those topics.
So Faith, I could share this. This came up at our CAVE conference. And by the way, I also sent the CAVE board of directors, and so we are getting feedback from school districts now that are doing this program. But it echoes what we all just said. There's a lot of content to cover from CERC. CERC did a mile wide and almost like a mile deep layout of the course, from what I could tell, to Dawn and Kristen's comments earlier, to be consistent across the state. And this is the first year, I believe, it's being offered. So I think by the end of the school year, you're going to see a lot of feedback from other school districts, including Cheshire, on how to make the course maybe better and perhaps a little more autonomous. So I hope at the end of the school year, we have an ability to get that feedback from everyone, be it our parents, the students in the class, our teachers, and sum it up, and we could bring that to not just CERC, but the State Department of Ed. And the State Department of Ed is the authority, not CERC. CERC is the resource, but the SDE relies on CERC for guidance. So the more feedback we give them, the more I think this will evolve in a positive direction. But there is a lot of content. I'm surprised. I think this could easily be 3 different courses, especially if you include indigenous population. So I understand the struggle there.
Yeah.
I would just add that I don't have those same concerns that you seem to have, Faith, because I happen to know that professional teachers know how to take the givens and then create the course using whatever autonomy you can to, and what the knowledge that you have about what your students do know and what they still need to know. But this kind of a course is, I mean, we get students at the college level, they come to college and they can't handle these issues of people who operate sort of just differently. You know, they come from different backgrounds, and so they think about things differently, and it's hard for them when they get into the classroom and they're hearing these stories and issues that from other students in their classes that are so different from their experiences, and they've never grappled with this kind of material before. And so I think this is really important. It's an important course. I'm thrilled that the state is doing this, and as I said before, I'm thrilled that we have the resources in our faculty at Cheshire High to be able to pull this together in a really cohesive way. So
Yeah.
I had a question for Marlene. So is the goal still that, at the end of the school year, kind of do an assessment of how everything went with the course, and gather feedback from everybody? And my guess is it will be offered again because it's been very popular, which is a good thing. But anything that we can take back to Department of Ed feedback, I know they're going to listen. So.
Yeah, I think one of the important things in our decision to teach this class this year was specifically because our feedback would be taken into consideration as they move forward with the course. So I think that all of the work that Dawn and Erin have been doing, and the sessions that they've been attending both over the summer and throughout this school year, I know their voices are being heard and that they are bringing this information back. I think we're also very interested to know at the end of the year how things are going, and to hear from them, by the time we get to May, June. But that was an important part of our decision. So thank you, Tony, for that. And also, even just in the areas and then in the meetings that Kevin attends, that I attend, that you attend, when it comes to getting our voices heard with the state, that's where we can all advocate for the different pieces of this course that are working and those that aren't working. Not that I've heard that there aren't too many that are working, but we know we have a lot of resources for sure, a lot of breadth here.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try to see if I had. I am gonna ask this. Have you had pushback? I mean, clearly this has been a controversial course. I don't think any one of us, we shouldn't ignore the fact that there was a lot of hubbub that preceded this course. What are you hearing? What are you hearing from the community? What are you hearing from kids? I mean, clearly in your class, they seem to be, if what you're saying is, I assume it's an accurate reflection. How are others responding to it?
Yeah, do you want to go, Erin?
I've only heard positive things. I don't know if anyone would tell me anything negative, but the students seem to love the class. They're engaged in the class. I've had other students ask about it, wondering who it is open to, making sure it's open to them. And I said it's open to everybody. And yeah, I haven't heard anything but good things about it. As one of the teachers, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't say otherwise to me, but I've only heard positive things about the class. Dawn, have you?
And it's
And
been
I'm not
really
saying
exciting.
yeah,
No.
I'm not saying I've heard anything. I've gotten any emails or anything. There's a lot of press leading up
Yeah.
to the introduction of this course. That's why I was asking.
I
Yeah,
think what
I haven't heard
we're
anything.
hearing from kids a lot is like, if you could, I wish you could meet this group of kids. They're a wonderful like group of kids, and I know it's a bit self-selected because they're the first group that like chose to take this on. So that is a special group right there. But there's so much knowledge they're bringing into the course too, and like just their own explorations that they've done, and like just the watching them synthesize the things that they've been interested in, and finally it has a space for their education. There's a space for them to share these questions that they've been asking or wondering about, or learning new things about their classmates, and hearing people talk, as Anne said, about their about experiences, and like being like, what, I didn't know my classmates were having an experience. But it's been really great to see them pull things together, like to take this knowledge, this realm of knowledge that they have, that they're really interested in, they've been exploring on their own, and then synthesizing it with like all of the history that Erin's presenting them with, and pulling that together and just really making sense of the world that they're living in. And I think they seem to be, I think if they're talking about it, it's with like good experiences outwardly to their classmates. And it's only lent a rich background for me as a literature teacher, even though I'm not teaching American Lit this year. It's just been a wonderful lens to like almost every book that I teach, that I have more background, more information to step from. So I think it's enriched my classes as well.
I also haven't heard one comment in the negative regarding this course at all. Nothing. And I think when I've seen the students in action, and I've seen Erin and Dawn in action, there's a strong sense of community in the class, and it's a group of students that feels very comfortable learning together and going deep into what they're learning. They are learning history, and a lot of the history that they're learning is complicated, and they're being asked to, as Dawn has said a couple of times, to synthesize, to analyze, and so they're learning at a high level, and they're supporting one another. So that it's I think it's been a wonderful experience for us and for our students so far.
I was going to just add on to Faith's question. Have there been any parents of students in the class reaching out to you for content, syllabus, any concerns? I haven't heard any. And the only reason why I ask is, unfortunately, it's not surprising. The course in general has nothing to do with Cheshire, is always surrounded by political controversy, and there's national headlines of kids being indoctrinated one way or the other. It's not the case in Cheshire. It's also come up in some seminars with CABE. And I always tell folks to look at, if your child is actually in this course, front row seat to see exactly what's happening, and reach out to teachers if there's a question on something. I haven't heard anything. No one's complained. If anything, there's been more positivity around, hey, how can we as parents learn more about, so that if my student wants to enroll next year, it's something. So I'm just, and again, I won't create any work for anybody, but maybe toward the end of the year, it'd be nice if we can somehow showcase the course, like a 20-minute or less summary, high level of what the course was, or some student feedback they're comfortable. And so I think educating our community a little bit on what this actually is is a very positive thing. But just a few reactions from parents, but it doesn't sound like you're really getting anything negative.
None.
That's good.
Not on my end.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
Great. Well, I don't have any more. I think we should probably set the agenda for June right now, and or maybe early September. But find out, just get a year-end report on, and as Tony said, perhaps showcase it and see some of the work that the kids have done. So
Yeah,
thank you, guys.
Is it possible?
I'm sorry.
I'm wondering if it's possible to do any videotaping of any of the presentations. I mean, you need consent, I suppose, but for the purposes of highlighting I don't know.
You know I'm all about this show. We'll definitely find a way. Once the musical is done, we will find a way to either, bring you to it or bring it to you. But you really need to meet these kids, and I'd really love for you to see the projects and the level of thinking that they are bringing to all of the work that they're doing. So I 100% agree, and we will definitely find a way to make that possible.
Yes, we will find a way. And Mike Salamini is on the call, so
yeah,
you know that we're going to be calling you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
And thank you for
guys.
sticking around tonight.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both very much for all that you're doing.
Nice job. Thank you.
All right. Now we need we're going to get an update on the elementary report card. And again, Marlene.
Sure. I just wanted to let the group also know, I didn't want to interrupt their presentation, but the technology over at Town Hall blipped. So we knew that we were all being recorded and we were being live streamed, but during that time we did record it. Mike Salamini let me know, and now we are back live again. So there was a time in there that it was not live streamed, but the entirety of this will be able to be posted because we are recording. Okay. So next up is the elementary report card regarding the characteristics of the vision of the graduate. So you will recall that a couple of years ago, the Personalized Learning Task Force convened, and the result of many hours of work, community members, board members, parents, students, teachers, administrators, was the vision of the graduate. And as a result of that, we needed to make some changes to the elementary report card. So I am going to toss it over to Kevin, who's going to just provide a brief update in how we've done that.
Sure, thank you. So if you think about an elementary report card, you will certainly see reading, writing, and math on there with feedback on student performance in those areas. There's also a section called Characteristics of Successful Learners. And this might be akin to like a work habits type section where we're really tuning into not necessarily the content of what students are learning, but really how they're approaching their learning. So categories on that characteristics of successful learners over a long period of time have been things like community contributor, self-directed learner, effective communicator. And you might recognize those as part of our Cheshire performance standards. With the updates Marlene was referencing just a few minutes ago, those performance standards related to the vision of the graduate were updated in 2019. One really important update to those was the inclusion of complex thinker and creative thinker as part of the performance standards. So on our elementary report card, we were giving feedback on things like self-directed learner because that has been part of our performance standards for a long time. But I hope all of you know that we've got two big areas of emphasis in Cheshire. One of them is complex thinking, and the other, of course, is social emotional learning. So when we reviewed our elementary report card, we want to make sure that we're assessing and providing feedback on the things that are most important to us. So the inclusion of some attributes related to complex thinking and creative thinking were really important to include on the report card. So that's a long way to say our characteristics of successful learners section, akin to work habits, this year was updated to include complex thinker and creative thinker as two big areas that we gave feedback to students on. And under each one of those, as has been the case for a long time, there are 3 to 4 descriptors of what those look like. as we're sorting through all of that, one of the important things for us to think through and communicate about is if we're thinking about complex thinkers, what does that look like at a first grade level? What does that look like at a third grade level? What does that look like at a fifth grade level? And that's a big part of the work that is going on kind of in the background as we're giving feedback to parents and students on the report card. So we wanted you to be aware that we've updated that section of the report card to be aligned with our current vision of the graduate, our current performance standards. Most notably, the inclusion of complex thinker as one area of feedback that we're giving to families.
Any questions? I'm curious, how do you measure this?
Yeah.
These two, especially these two.
Yeah, a good
areas.
portion of that comes through the daily observations of what's happening in the classroom. So, for example, one of the descriptors says identifies, analyzes, and solve complex problems. So then what we're looking for, teachers are observing for areas in our curriculum where students have to grapple with complex problems. One really regular area that happens is in math on a near daily basis when students are working on application problems. So teachers are observing how they're approaching those problems. So if they're using different strategies, if they're able to effectively communicate them, they're thinking on those things, that's evidence that that they are thinking complexly. So, and Faith, as talking through and working through with teachers those very things, we've been giving feedback on these characteristics, on many of the characteristics of successful learners for a long time, self-directed learners. So there is always that question, well, what does that mean? And it really comes primarily based on the day-to-day observations of the teachers, not necessarily a single assessment of some kind. It's really coming through that strong knowledge of what a teacher sees every day with students.
And I understand it's not a test on critical thinking, like,
Right.
that it is observational, but I just, there with kids, you can get multiple days where they're just plain sullen and not, so I guess what happens when this, it just seems kind of, amorphous.
So one maybe important thing to know is how we give that feedback. It's described as consistently demonstrating, usually demonstrating, inconsistently demonstrating. So that those descriptors may help a little bit with what you're thinking about. And they're really points of conversations for teachers and parents and students to point to areas of growth. So I may be a student who very quietly kind of works in the background, and if I get stuck on a problem, I might not necessarily reach out for assistance in that to get assistance and feedback on that problem. Well, when a teacher sees that over time, they recognize that, and they're able to give feedback to say, hey, working on those self-advocacy skills, and that's something that would fall under self-directed learner, is a really important next step for Kevin to grow as a learner on that front. So it really, for each one of these descriptors, when you get to know the students working with them day in, day out, teachers actually have a good amount of evidence on that front. Some of them are trickier than others because these are pretty lofty vision of the graduate type statements. So we definitely spend some time on some of the ones that are just a little bit trickier to think through what this looks like at a first grade level, third grade level. But for each one of them, we're able to gather a good amount of information about what students are bringing to the table, not just what they know math-wise or reading-wise, but how they're approaching it.
Okay. Anne, sorry.
Yeah, quick question. So do they have all of those reports that you just described do they have them for every subject area that they teach?
It is not for every subject area they teach because there's a large number, it's approximately 20 indicators. So they don't do that for every subject that they teach. So for most of our elementary students, they have one teacher. As you get into the upper grade levels, when they share teachers, whatever team it is, pair or team of teachers gives collective feedback on that front. That practice really hasn't changed from the previous versions of these because we really updated. We didn't update the process. We didn't update the we didn't update any of the practices. It was really making sure we were giving feedback relative to our updated language and our updated areas of priority. So it's not by subject. That our report card would be very very long if we did that.
No, that's why I was thinking that way. And so would it be accurate to think of it as, so an example of creative thinking is during math when Johnny does this, he's very consistent about the way that he is able to explain and strategize coming to answers. I mean, at some point, is the subject matter brought in to show the examples? Because my thinking is a child could be doing really making leaps and bounds in reading and writing, but not showing those same good strategies when he or she does math.
Sure.
When they do math, let's be politically correct.
I see that happening. That's why things like parent conferences are really important, right? So
right.
We have an indicator. You might have an area that shows as a usually demonstrate or inconsistently demonstrate, and that's your prompt to have that conversation. When I see Kevin, when he's working in writing class, he's able to think about 2 or 3 different ways to introduce his stories, and he's really good at that. When it comes to math, he gets stuck on one way, and that's something that we're working on, and we're trying to work with him on helping to, right? So these are prompts and areas of feedback so that you can have those kinds of conversations through conferences and any other parent communication.
And the fact that you haven't wanted or haven't made any adjustments to that process, does that indicate that you're pretty happy with the way that you can give feedback with this report, this kind of reporting?
I'm going to say yes, and it's something that we are reviewing continuously with teachers throughout this year, because these, if for no other reason, it's a high volume of pieces of feedback that we're giving. And we want to make sure part of the point and purpose of progress reports and report cards is that it communicates something with meaning. And we firmly believe that these vision of the graduate, these performance standard statements carry a lot of meaning, but we want to make sure it's translating well when we're having those conversations with parents. So that's something that I would say yes, and we're actively reviewing, because what we're doing right now might not be the final version of what we do next year on this. I certainly believe that it would be tweaks and revisions to it, not a wholesale change into it. It's good practices. It's important feedback to give. It separates the things that are reading performance versus what a student's bringing to the table as a learner, right? Math performance and what a student's bringing to the table as a learner. And the main point of the presentation is to say, we really wanted to make sure it was updated with our current priorities, including things like complex thinking.
Well, thank you. I know you'll stay on top of it, Kevin.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions on? Faith, that microphone issue.
I hate it. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay,
I think we're good. Thank you, Kevin. Next agenda item, what are students reading at the middle school level and the skills they're learning?
Thank you. So this is a continuation of the conversation that we had begun last month when we talked about
what students are reading at the elementary level. And we're trying to show over the course of this year the sort of scope and sequence and continuum of the English Language Arts program, specifically related to reading. So we have a wonderful guest with us this evening, Kristen Shanley. So I am going to turn the next segment of our meeting over to Kristen.
Great, thanks, Marlene.
Yeah, and I'll actually just start off with a couple quick nuggets. What we're hoping to, Kristen is the division leader for language arts at Dodd Middle School, as well as the library media specialist. And what we're hoping to share tonight is really 3 different things with what students are reading: what they're reading as a whole class, what they're reading independently, and what they're reading through book clubs. As this is a continuation of kind of our elementary conversation, we really want to emphasize tonight that we're focused on the middle school learner. This is a transition moment in time for them, and the programming that we provide not only through language arts, but for all areas of Dodd Middle School really capture and represent our middle school learners and recognizing where they are. And we'll finish off the presentation with just a little bit of information on how we stay connected to family, because that's an important part of this process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen. And Kristen, just let me know when you want these advanced, okay?
All right, great. Thanks, Kevin. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here to share. I will just start, like Kevin said, with an overview of what we do at Dodd. So one of the aspects of our reading program involves whole class texts. And you'll see here a sampling of some of the common titles in both 7th and 8th grade. And the standards a sampling of the standards that are addressed for these various texts. So for an example, one of the things that a teacher might do is to focus on figurative language, and they would use one of these titles as a mentor text, and that would be the guide for the students to learn about figurative language and how to find the similes and metaphors and personification in a particular piece of text. That would give the teachers a way to assess the students and see if they're understanding the skill, and move them forward to then do this with their own independent reading books. So it's kind of, we have these whole class as a mentor text, kind of as a touchstone to come back to and make sure the students are understanding the skills. So go ahead, Kevin. That'll bring us to the next one. So the next portion is our independent reading. And the independent reading is actually the largest portion of our reading program. The whole class would probably be the smallest. And you'll see on this slide that we have designed the curriculum so that there's a mini lesson focused on the standards, and then the students are diving into their own independent reading books. And as Kevin mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we are very much aware of the middle school student, and we want to make sure that they are loving the books that they are reading. Statistics show that at the middle school age, it is very common for there to be a drop-off in reading. And so we are aware and wanting to make sure that that doesn't happen and that our students are continuing with the books. And we find that the best way to do that is by offering them choice and giving them some say in what they're reading. I know from personal experience, I have some times in my my own reading career where I was not really thrilled to be reading a certain book. And I know that had I been given more choice, I think I would have latched onto it a lot earlier. So you'll see there's a quote here on this slide that says, teenagers want to read if we let them. Students who I believe are determined non-readers become committed, passionate readers given the right books, time to read, and regular responses to their thinking. The pathway to difficult reading begins with books they enjoy. So we're building them up with the skills that they need to tackle those books that are more difficult as they move on to the high school.
So you'll see here, there are a lot of different standards that we address through their independent reading. And as I mentioned, the teachers are going to give those mini lessons at the beginning of a class and then give the students some time to delve into those with their independent reading books. One of the more complicated standards that the teachers may focus on is how an author develops points of view over the course of the text, and also interacting between one character and another, or how a character changes over the course of the text. Those are some things where students can really demonstrate their thinking and show that they are not only comprehending what they're reading, but also analyzing and using that complex thinking that we're looking for. All right. So here are a couple other quotes. And these are from, I read a lot. I read a lot of young adult books. I read a lot of adult books, and I read a lot of professional and personal development books. So these are all experts in the field of education, specifically English education. And Kylene Beers and Robert Probst have been around for ages. And their quote there shows, says, independent reading is not simply reading independently, free from the teacher's control and direction. It is reading that leads to independence, reading that may generate new and previously unimagined ideas about who we are, who we might become, how we might function in the world. And I feel like that really captures what we want for our students: to fall in love with reading, be deep thinkers, and think about the world differently than they may have before. A couple other quotes here. So the top one is by Donalyn Miller. She has written several books particularly focused on independent reading. And the bottom one is one by Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle, who are also gurus in the education field, English education field. And Kevin jokes with me because he would come into my office and I was reading this book for Essential Studies, and he's like, and I go, well, so I'm reading this book and it's so good. And he's like, okay. So independent reading practice is the foundation for building critical thinking skills. We believe that independent reading and book clubs lead our students to deeper thinking than whole class novel study. So developing those skills early on in the middle school level is going to make them that much stronger as high school students. And that brings us to our final portion of our reading, which is book clubs. And book clubs are a newer addition to our DOD reading program. And it is something that I think we can say teachers, students, and parents, everyone is very excited about it. So it is a welcome addition. And I think a lot of positives have come from it. So we have begun both the 7th grade and 8th grade year with a book club where there are 5 or 6 titles, and they are centered around a common theme. Then each of the books has shared resources, nonfiction, poetry, a variety of different resources. Some of them are podcasts and songs, and they're related to those themes so that students can learn more deeply on the books that they are reading. And then we have them end up doing a final project together or individually, depending upon what they chose, on their books. So it says, yep, good, that's fine. So the standards here, you'll see similar standards that we use throughout the year are being brought back again with our book clubs. And there are titles for the 7th grade book clubs at the beginning of the year, the 8th grade book clubs. The 7th grade teachers last year, we did our dystopian titles in the spring as a second round of book clubs because our first one was so successful. Also thinking back to our middle school students who want to be social, want to communicate with other kids, and this is a perfect opportunity for them to do so in an academic manner and also learn about others and their thinking. And that's some of the feedback that we got from the students was very positive on how they felt about being involved in a book club. We did a survey at the end of our units, and the large majority of them were really surprised at what they learned from listening to other students, and they shared that they didn't think of these things before, and that it made them more accountable for their reading because they knew they needed to be ready to participate in a conversation. And then our 8th grade is going to be adding a historical fiction book club unit at the end of this year, and those titles are still to be determined. Couple quotes, and there's that Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher. A volume of reading is necessary practice to become strategic readers. Book clubs motivate us to read. And I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in a book club, but I think that they offer a great opportunity for you to read things that you maybe wouldn't necessarily choose on your own, and also to learn about others and the worlds that everybody represents. So I feel like it's a perfect fit for our middle school students.
One of the important parts is, especially at this middle school age, is as students become more complex readers, they can read text that is actually complex and heftier and heftier. But we want to make sure not only that students are reading at the right level, but the content, the themes are appropriate to them as individuals, developmentally and family-wise and otherwise. So keeping a good partnership with families is an important aspect of the work that we do. These are 2 quotes from kind of an early communication in the year that each of the teams and language arts teachers at Dodd send out to parents. We encourage that parents keep a strong connection to what their children are reading, and to learn about those books. So one way to do that is to pick up the book and read alongside with them. Sometimes faster or more convenient ways are to use resources like Common Sense Media to help get some feedback to help get some feedback and some information on what the books are about. I think this has been a pretty successful practice, just based in my conversations with Kristen about making sure that what students are reading really match things that are going to A, interest them, but B, be okay and appropriate for them. So this has been a good tool to help parents have a good understanding of what their child is reading, to ask questions of their children, to reach out to teachers as needed. And I think that it's just been one important practice that we have utilized to help make sure that we're growing readers. So that's our quick snapshot, and you can see from elementary into the middle grades the importance of mentor text and independent reading kind of are through lines to that, and the addition of book clubs, really developmentally appropriate practice for our middle school students, and really tap into some of their strengths and some of their motivations to be connected to that book club. And I just remember the feedback that Kristen and some of the teachers gave after we first implemented that part of our practice last year. And it was a very positive practice that I think fostered greater reading throughout the school year, not just at the beginning. Questions for either Chris and I on what students are reading at Dodd Middle School?
You guys, nothing?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Okay, well, it wouldn't be me if I didn't ask a couple. Okay. Just a general question. So you teach the kids how to identify the various, rhetorical devices and parts of speech and everything, and speech. How do you explain to them, because they're really just probably not at the age to appreciate a simile, really, but how do you explain to them why this is so important for literature? How do you get through to them on that?
Well, I think that there are a variety of ways depending upon the teacher, but one thing that you might do, I actually think it is more of a writing lesson in terms of the appreciation, and then it ties into reading. But I think that obviously, like, literature and writing are all intertwined, and so that's why it's language arts. But I would first show them models of a writing piece that has no similes or metaphors. And we do lessons with the students on showing, not telling. And it's very bland and doesn't really grab the reader. And then show them an example that has those similes and metaphors and good, strong figurative language. And they're pretty good to say, the second one's a lot better than the first one, and they will be able to pull out. And even if they can't identify, oh, that's a simile, they're going to know that the writing style that author uses is so much stronger than what they see in the first piece. And I think that that's where the appreciation grows. And then you attach a name to it and move on from there.
Okay, makes great sense. And then, so your 3 areas, do you have like a breakdown of the proportion of time you spend on, for example, the class book, the independent reading book, the book club book? I mean, how does that all fit into a schedule?
So the book club books start for about the first month of the school year. We do some pre-reading activities. We call it like a reading launch, where we make sure that the students are familiar with reading strategies so that they're prepared to dive into those book club books. Then we spend about a month, and some of those, during that time, we're also using some of those common texts, and they're not novels, they're short stories or poems or nonfiction texts. So they're not like large pieces, but at that time, the students would also, before they go into book clubs, be perusing the classroom libraries to make sure that they're like finding books that they might be interested in, so that when we finish our book club unit, then the next many months are spent with independent reading, and the students are reading one book after another and diving into things that they are learning, and that is supplemented with our whole class mentor texts as we move through different standards. And then we'll end the year with another book club unit for about a month.
So with the independent reading, do you have pre-selected books, or you just kind of let them run? They run at the library.
I mean, so like Kevin suggested, like Kevin mentioned, Common Sense Media, we definitely use that as a tool. We have classroom libraries that are full of books. I know in the elementary presentation, Anne-Marie had talked a bit about those classroom libraries and the curation of those libraries. And similarly, at the middle school level, we're always adding new texts to our middle school libraries to keep them current, and same as the Dodd Library as well. So they do have free reign in, and then that's why we mentioned that it's important for our parents to stay in touch with us as well if they have concerns about their reading.
Okay. Alrighty. That's all I've got, unless anyone else wants to add. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
All right.
Marlene, now
very
you have
positive.
an issue.
Thank you, Kristen, so much for being here, and Kevin for your wonderful introduction as well. I think this is really giving the committee a really deeper understanding of what the continuum looks like for students. So thank you. And Kristen, it's so great to see your enthusiasm for your own reading and what you do for students come across. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the meeting. And unless, Anne, just give me a second. I just want to say this. Unless you all want to stay around, I am going to ask Anne, do you have something to say?
No, I'm late for another meeting, so I move to adjourn.
By all means. Okay, second.
I second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
We're good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christian, again, and have a good evening, all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yep.